All right, we are live. Technically. So I'll make sure I share it out and get a couple thousand views in a second once we start going.
Okay.
Well,
Technically.
you're here next. I'll make sure I share it out and get a couple thousand views in a second once we start going.
Okay.
Well,
Technically. I can see myself there, so somewhere.
all right, Wally, we are live, sir.
Awesome. How you doing tonight, Dan?
We are doing fantastic. We're actually in Orlando at our month 10X meeting.
That's awesome. I saw a post on your page. It looks like it's really pretty down there. Nice weather.
It's absolutely beautiful. That's why some of us live here.
Well, Colorado's beautiful too, just a little colder.
Where are you located at, Wally?
I'm in Colorado Springs, about an hour south of Denver.
Awesome. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are, kind of introduce yourself and what you do.
Sure. I'm Weldon Long, author of the New York Times bestseller, The Power of Consistency. And really my work and my writing and my speaking is about overcoming adversity, prospering beyond the challenges. I spent 25 years of my life living on the streets, 13 years in federal and state penitentiary systems. And in fact, 14 years ago, was released from prison the last time. Was living in a homeless shelter just about 5 miles north of where I live today. And when I got to that homeless shelter, I was 40 years old. I had no job. I had no money. I was a 3-time convicted felon. I was a 9th grade high school dropout. I had absolutely nothing going on in my life except for one very valuable thing. During the course of those last few years in prison, I had stumbled into the information that really radically changed my life, the prosperity mindset, learning to thrive in the face of challenges, to create success, to prosper in the face of any adversity. And so, although I had nothing of a material way, no income, no house, no money, no cars, none of that kind of stuff, I had that right mindset. And so in 2003, January of 2003, I was living in that homeless shelter. I'd just been released from prison. I had just finished a 7-year sentence. I did a total of 13 years. The last time was for 7 years. And but with that mindset, I was determined to go out and make some amazing thing happen. And so I went out, I started knocking on doors and started applying the things I had learned, the years of studying I had done in the penitentiary, and took about 6 months to get a job, and did pretty well at that. The following year, decided to open my own company. I grew that company to $20 million in revenue. In fact, in 2009, we were selected by Inc. magazine as one of the fastest growing companies in America. Sold that company, wrote my first book, which is a little book called The Upside of Fear, which was a memoir, an autobiographical memoir, and really the story of my life, the challenges I faced, the obstacles I overcame. That book did very well. And when that started going well, people started calling, and that's how the speaking thing kind of took off. People wanted to know, how do you overcome 13 years in prison, a 9th grade high school education? I mean, I got sales guys over here are bitching about their ex-wife. They're bitching about this boss from 3 years ago. People have a tendency to let really, really stupid little things keep them down. And what I've learned is the magic potion of thriving in the face of any challenge. That's what the power of consistency is about. And it really defines the work that I do, primarily in the sales industry, although I do a lot of speaking outside of the sales industry. Most of it I apply because one of the reasons I was successful in business is because I knew how to sell. And as we all know, nothing happens till something gets sold. So the last 7 years speaking and writing.
What was the company that you grew to 20 million in revenue right when after you got out of the penitentiary?
Yeah, it was a little heating and air conditioning company. I knew nothing about heating and air conditioning, and I still don't to this day, which is ironic since I'm considered one of the leading experts on how to sell air conditioning systems. I couldn't fix one to save my life or install one, but it just goes to show you don't need to know the operation side of your business. If you know how to sell, you have the right mindset. But I worked. My first job was a job as a heating and air conditioning sales guy. I got a job selling air conditioning systems to homeowners, and I did well at it. So I decided one day I was going to open my own company. Didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I knew I had to sell. And I figured as long as I was generating leads and selling, that everything else would take care of itself. So I hired the operations guys that I needed, and we took off and started running direct mail and newspaper ads back when people still read the newspaper 13, 14 years ago. We did $2 million our first year, $3.5 million our second year, $7 million our third year. Then 2008, 2009, the recession hit. We kind of leveled off at about $6.5 million. But we didn't go under like a lot of our competitors because of the mindset. And I teach my people the mindset. It's mandatory. If you're working in my companies in any capacity, you have to have the prosperity mindset, which means no bitching, no whining, no blaming, basically. That we look at adversity as opportunity. When everybody else is zigging, we zag. And as long as we keep the right mindset, keep getting up every day and working hard, we're going to make it. And so we leveled off in those years. And then in January 2010, I sold the company.
Awesome. So if I'm hearing you right, bitching and moaning doesn't do anything for business, huh?
No, was once said, I believe it was Thoreau that said, or maybe it was Emerson, one of those guys that use lots of prepositions. But the saying is that regret calamity only if you can thereby help the sufferer. In other words, don't get upset about bad things unless you can help somebody with it. I mean, if something bad happens to you, I'm your friend, I'm going to help you out, right? That's not wasted suffering. But all too many people spend endless hours suffering, grieving over something that happened in the past, right? And they don't benefit the sufferer. They're just complaining about it. They're not helping themselves. They're not helping anybody else. I mean, when I look at bad things that happen, when bad shit happens, it's like it sucks enough when it first happens. The last thing I want to do is relive it for 5 or 10 years. You know what I'm saying? And so it's really about moving forward. And the process that I teaches folks how to do that and how to create that mindset. We all know that successful people have a kind of an optimistic, positive attitude. We all know that. Think about the most successful person you know and just describe their personality in your mind. And we all will describe the same person. Think about the biggest loser you know, and we'll all describe the same person, same characteristics, right? So we know there's a correlation between the right attitude and the right mindset. What people don't understand is that you can actually create the mindset. You don't have to be blessed with it or cursed not to have it. You can create it regardless of your circumstances. I mean, I came from the worst conceivable circumstances one could come from and created enormous wealth, enormous prosperity because of this guy right here, keeping the mind right.
So what kind of advice do you think that from a business owner standpoint that you can give to your people to keep them focused on having the right mindset? Like what does that look like for you? What are some of the things you do to make sure they maintain the right mindset?
Well, and it depends a little bit on what size of company you're talking about. If you look at small and mid-sized companies, the biggest challenge I think they face is that, nothing happens, as I said, till something gets sold, right? You create revenue, you sell at great margins. That's going to help you solve a lot of problems. And I think what small and mid-sized companies need to understand is that there has to be an enormous focus on sales. And in small companies, especially, sales is looked at as almost like something to be avoided, right? If you think about some organizations, they elevate their technology, they elevate their process, whatever their operations are, but then they'll hire some guy off the streets to do their sales because nobody else wants to do it, right? Usually a brother-in-law or something. If you have, a small company and whatever your technology is, there's never a time where you would go and you would grab your accountant and say, hey, can you help us out in the factory? Can you help us out in the field today? Right? You wouldn't do that because they don't have the expertise. But when it comes to sales, we'll grab somebody with a pulse and a heartbeat and say, hey, you're my sales guy. He has no skills. He has no training. He has no drive, no motivation, no desire to be in sales. In fact, a lot of times they're in sales until they get a real job, in their mind. And so the number one thing I tell the business owner, small, medium size, and even large, I mean, FedEx is a client of mine. And I do sales training for FedEx. And it's amazing. You're talking about a Fortune 50 company here, and they have the exact same challenges, getting people to execute on the sales process on a consistent basis. Now, fortunately, they have the resources to bring guys like me in to get them focused on the right process. But, people don't understand the value of the sales process. But in terms of having the right mindset, it's about getting, a clear vision individually. What do I want to get focused on? It's a simple 4-step process. It's actually based on the name of my first book, The Upside of Fear. Fear is an acronym: focus, emotional commitment, action, responsibility. Step 1, you got to get focused. What the hell do I really want? And sometimes you got to dig a little bit. We say, okay, I want a beautiful wife, I want a Ferrari, and I want a nice house, right? You can say all those things, but you got to ask yourself, what are those things going to give me? Right? And then what is that going to give me? And so on. I was talking to a young man recently, and he told me his financial goal was to make $150,000 a year. And I said, great, what's that going to get you? He said, well, I'm going to pay off all my debt. And I said, that's awesome. What's that going to get you? He said, well, I'm going to get a house. I'm like, that's great. You don't have to have one. I went many years of my life without one. What's a house going to get you? He said, when I get a house, I'm going to get a family. So what was really driving him was this desire to have a family, right? So sometimes you got to peel the onion a little bit to find out what you really want to get focused on. So I encourage people to get focused on 3 important priorities: their money, their relationships, and their health, right? If you think about it, your money is your retirement, your business, your profession, your financial security. Your relationships are your spouse, your kids, your community, your family, your friends. And your health is your mental, spiritual, and physical health. If you're focusing on your key priorities in those 3 areas, what else is there? There's nothing. There's nothing outside of those areas that really matters. You know, Stephen Jobs once said the key to his success was focus and simplicity. And so what I encourage people to do is to get focused on what's really important, those 3 areas, 1 or 2 goals in each of those areas. Once you figure out what you want, you got to figure out what do you got to do. Okay, so if I want to make $200,000 a year, what have I got to do? The key here is to keep it simple, right? And a lot of times people could list 100 things they got to do to make $200,000 a year. Problem is the confused mind says no, right? And so what happens when you got 200 things to do is nothing happens, because we get the old paralysis through analysis stuff. So I tell people to follow the ancient wisdom of Lao Tzu. 1,000-mile journey begins with what?
1 step.
1 step. We all know that, right? So why in the hell do we not listen to that? That wisdom's been down for thousands of years and we ignore it. You know, one of my definitions of insanity is finding something that works and then not using it, you know? So Lao Tzu told us several thousand years ago, focus on the first step. And what do people want to do when they have a goal? They want to figure out the 100 step and the 200 step. As a result, nothing happens. They sit on their ass and nothing happens. So the key is, if you figure out, here's what I want financially, let's say it's to make $200,000 a year. What 1 or 2 things, just 1 or 2, do I have to do every single day to make that happen? Just 1 or 2. 1 or 2 things on a consistent basis. So if I'm a sales professional and I want to go out there and make $200,000 a year, you know what I got to do? I got to run every sales call with passion and purpose. That means committing 100% of myself and to my customer on every call, not dropping off a bid, not going to the motions, not accepting, you know, I'll call you next Tuesday stuff, you know, but going in, running every call with passion and with purpose, total commitment, right? Unwavering commitment. And then learn how to diagnose problems and recommend solutions, right? In other words, learn to find out what your customer's problems are and recommend solutions, i.e. ask for the order, right? My standard ask, which is the title of my next book, Will You Trust Me? Mr. Prospect, I'm going to recommend these things based on what you told me. Will you trust me? You know, so you got to figure out, if I do those 2 things on every call, if I ran every call with passion and purpose and I asked for the order every single time, would I make more money or less money?
More.
Make more money. You couldn't make less money if you started doing that, right? So just focus on those 2 things every day. When you master those 2 things, then start working in some other stuff, right? I mean, Lao Tzu didn't say don't ever take another step. He just said focus on the first stuff first, right? Dr. Covey, as you can see in this picture behind me, I don't even see it, Stephen Covey, one of my mentors, very close friend of mine before he passed away. He used to always say, you know, you got to put first things first. He often used to quote Johann Goethe. Goethe said, never let that which is most important in your life be at the mercy of that which is least important in your life, right? So it's not that you won't get to some other issues. It's just that you got to focus on the important stuff first. Run every call with passion and purpose and ask for the order. So that's kind of the first step on the focus. Then you got to get emotionally committed to those things. And I encourage people to write out what I call a prosperity plan. Write it out. And, you know, it's thousands of year old stuff, nothing new here. Write out what you want and what you got to do to get it in present, current tense, right? I first did this. I was sitting in the penitentiary. It was June 10th of 1996, 21 years ago. I was in a federal prison sentence, just starting a 7-year prison sentence, and my father died. And that was kind of the moment of clarity that I decided I was going to change my life. And I started studying and realizing that my negative thoughts, the thoughts of drugs and violence and chaos, they were all showing up in my life. And so I decided, okay, hey, I'm gonna start a new life for myself, right? In fact, I'm gonna read something. Hold on, we'll grab something here. This is from my first book, The Upside of Fear. And I sat down at the little desk in the table, little metal table in my cell, and I decided what I was going to do was to write out what a perfect life for me would look like. Now, keep in mind, you know, another quote from Dr. Covey. Dr. Covey used to often say, you can live out of your imagination. You're not restricted to live out of your past. Well, sounds pretty obvious to a lot of people, but when I read that at 32 years old, 21 years ago, it didn't occur to me I could live out of my imagination. I thought I was relegated to living out of my past, which was a lot of bullshit, right? Prison, drugs, violence, guns, you name it. It was horrible. Poverty, struggle, homelessness. And then one day Covey says, live out of your imagination. Duh, right? Didn't seem so obvious at the point. So I sat down at the little metal desk in my cell. Here's what I wrote down. I'm an awesome father to my son. At the time, my son was 3 years old, and I had abandoned him. Didn't even know my son. I went to prison and left my own flesh and blood to fend for himself at 3 years old. I am an educated man. At the time, I was a ninth grade high school dropout. I'm in a beautiful mountain home. I'd never had a home anywhere. I'm a successful businessman, writer, and speaker. I got it in my head I wanted to be like Stephen Covey and the guys that were doing that stuff. At the time, nobody gave a shit about what I had to say. I'm writing a book in the beaches of Maui. I thought Maui was in the Caribbean. I didn't know where the hell it was. But I read a book by Wayne Dyer. He talks about Maui. I'm like, I'm going to Maui to write a book. And as long as I'm doing that, I'm going to need a place to live. So I have a house on the beaches of Maui as well. I'm wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. I was making 50 cents a day in the penitentiary. I have an honest, trustworthy, and beautiful wife. Let it suffice to say, unless you count on my Sally Bubba, I didn't have that either. Last thing on the list, I'm a man of character, honor, and integrity. Now, I had a better chance of getting struck by lightning and winning the lottery the same day than those things happened, right? But I wrote them down on a sheet of paper. I became convinced I could live out of my imagination. As Napoleon Hill said in Think and Grow Rich, imagine yourself already in possession of these things every day. Imagine yourself already in possession of these things. So I did. What the hell did I have to lose, right? I made that list out. I stuck it to the wall on my cell with on a sheet of paper stuck there with toothpaste. I put toothpaste all over the back of it, stuck to the wall of my cell. For the next 7 years, every day when I got up, that was the first thing I read. I would imagine myself being that person, having that life. Last thing before I went to bed at night, imagine myself already in possession of these things. So
what did that do?
What's that?
What did that do for your mindset when you're in
we don't have time to get into neurology. We don't have time to get into the neurology of it, but what it does, it carves entirely new neural pathways. It reshapes your brain. It becomes the new normal. So literally over the course of this period of time, it began to reshape my brain. These things became the expectation. 7 years later, I walked out of the penitentiary. Within 4 years, everything on that list came to pass. I went from living in a homeless shelter in 2003 to buying a house on Maui in 2007. In 4 years, everything on that list. My son was 10 years old when I got out, got custody of him, wrote books, became wealthy, et cetera, et cetera. My point is that you have to get deeply emotionally committed to those things. Imagine yourself already in possession. So what I encourage people to do is to write it out, just like I gave an example there, and then to review it in what I call a quiet time ritual for 15 minutes every morning. 15 minutes to read that list, imagine yourself in possession of these things, and it basically begins to reconstruct what's in your mind. I use the metaphor of a box. If I've got a motorcycle in a box, the parts of a motorcycle, and I pull the parts out of the box and I build a motorcycle, what's it going to be when I'm done? Is it going to be a cake? No, it's going to be a motorcycle, because whatever's in the box is all you can build, right? Well, our minds are like that box. The box is a metaphor for the mind. And we all have the components of our life in there, our money, our relationships, our health. It's all in there in the form of our expectations, our thoughts, our hopes, our dreams, our decisions. And once it gets full up of stuff, you start pulling it out. Every time you make a decision, you pull out a little piece of your life. What am I going to do with my money? Well, make a decision. Whatever decision you make is going to determine your life. That may be different than my decisions, and I may have different results than somebody else. So we got to ask ourselves, what's in the box? What's in the box? And typically it's bullshit. Typically it's bullshit that other people taught us 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. If we grow up and you get your expectations about money and wealth from where most of us did, which was from the Great Depression, because we're all 2 generations removed from the Great Depression. What did we learn about the Great Depression? Money is scarce, and people who have it are crooks. My dad used to always tell me rich people are crooks. Why is that? Well, who were the people with the money in the Great Depression? We had a name for them in this country. They were called the Great Robber Barons, right? So we associated wealth with dishonesty. If that's in our box, one of the things I do working with sales groups, we'll do a word association. I'll give them a word, and they write down as many words as they can in 5 seconds that remind them of that they associate with that word. And the word I give them is salesman. You would not believe the negative connotations that people write down about salesmen. And these are salespeople. These are people who are counting on their sales profession to feed their kids. And they'll write things down: sleazy, dishonest, hustler. I had a woman recently wrote down just the most horrible description of salespeople you can imagine: sleazeball, liars, scumbag, thieves. She was the sales manager for this company. It's like, how is she going to be successful with her salespeople with that kind of mindset? So that was what's in the box. So you got to make sure what's in your box. And again, we don't have time to go and how to change it. Go read The Power of Consistency. It'll tell you exactly how to change the contents of the box. So that's the emotional commitment phase. Review it, reprogram the box. Third step is action. You got to take consistent action. It's common sense. 4-step responsibility. Our life is not a reflection of our problems. Our life is a reflection of the decisions we make about our problems. 14 years ago, I was sitting in a homeless shelter, broken homeless, had nothing. My life today is not a reflection of going to prison and dropping out of high school in 9th grade. My life is a reflection of the better decisions I made about those things. Better decisions guarantee better results. That ain't rocket science. And so who's responsible for those decisions? I am. Where do decisions come from? My box. Guess I better know what's in that box. I guess I better design what should be in that box. And it better be something that I put in there this morning, not something my dad put in there 40 years ago. So that's kind of a quick overview, but that's the process to change the mindset. And I won't even teach sales training. I have companies all the time want me to come and do sales training, but they think the mindset stuff is too soft, right? It's too warm and fuzzy. And I won't even do the sales training. Why would I give somebody a sales training system that I know they're not going to use? Because they don't believe it can happen. Because they believe sales is pushy. Now they believe sales is snake oil, or the classic used car guy. What the hell's wrong with selling used cars anyway, right? So it's about changing that mindset. Changing the mindset. I mean, how many people out there think it's all about price? Oh, boss, they're half our price. Everybody's buying for the cheap guy. Let me ask you a simple question. If people really were making their decisions based on price, wouldn't it make sense that the cheapest company in your industry would also be the largest company, right? If everyone's gravitating towards the cheap guy, then the cheap company should be big, right? And with the exception of Walmart, where else can you find that? Nowhere. The biggest companies tend to be the most expensive, right? Because they're selling at good margins, because it takes a lot of money to grow a successful company. So the whole price is one of the things that we have to aggressively attack in people's minds. I mean, they'd have the concept that salespeople are crooks. It's all about price. Homeowners and customers just want a cheap price. They don't want to hear my spiel. If they think that, what the hell are they going to do? So the whole book, The Power of Consistency, is about reprogramming that whole mindset in every area of our life. It's what changed my life. It's the reason I'm sitting in a $1.5 million house today instead of a homeless shelter almost the same street, about 3 blocks over, 5 miles up, in a room with 8 guys 13 years ago. I didn't get luckier. I didn't get better looking. I got uglier over the 14 years, to be honest with you. I used to be young and handsome. I changed the way I think. It's a game changer.
So I'm going to ask you a question for someone that's watching, specifically a guy named Jim Weaver. He's been going through a lot of stuff lately. And he's pretty much going from right now, nothing, and he wants to be where you're at. So what kind of advice, short term, like what steps does he need to take right now in order to get his mind right?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I appreciate that. We'll call him Dream Weaver, Jimmy the Dream Weaver, baby. Dream Weaver. I appreciate he wants to be where I am right now, but keep in mind, I was exactly where he is, probably worse off, 13 years ago. So the first thing that I always tell people, I live my life by a very simple acronym, CPA. I cause, permit, or allow every circumstance in my life to happen. What that means is I am 100% responsible for the good shit and the bad shit, right? If there's bad shit in my life, I'm responsible. If there's good shit in my life, I'm responsible. What that means to me, to Jim, I hope to everybody, is that the first step is to take 100% total personal responsibility for the current situation, right? It's that word responsibility. I'll refer to Dr. Covey here, back behind me again. Dr. Covey used to say, take that word responsibility and turn it around. It says the ability to respond. That's what responsibility is. That means I have the ability to choose my response. Our lives are a reflection of our habitual thoughts and habitual decisions. And as Einstein said, you cannot change your life at the same level of thinking that created your life. You can't fix a problem thinking the same way you did when you created the problem. So the first step is you got to take personal responsibility. Okay, I created this situation. I'll give you an example. When I'm in a penitentiary, I was married to this crazy ass woman. God rest her soul. She's gone now, but she was a real humdinger. And when I was in prison, she ended up getting involved with some other men. And that happens quite often when men go to prison because their wives are alone and angry and all that stuff. And guys would sit in the penitentiary and they would blame and they would have the most horrible things to say about these women. They were this and the other thing and these horrible names. And I used to always think, wow, she's doing what she's doing because I left her alone and abandoned her. I'm responsible every bit as much as she is. Not many guys can say that. They want to be angry at the other person and not looking within. You know, if it is to be, it's up to me, right? You have to look within and say, okay, what did I do, Jim? What did you do to contribute to your current situation? I'm not saying other people didn't screw you over along the way. Listen, we've all been kicked in the teeth. We've all been lied to. We've all been hurt. We've all been abandoned. We've all been screwed over. Whatever. That's just life, right? Show me somebody in life who hasn't gone through that. So other people may have played a role in the situation, but we have to write down, what role did I play in my current situation? And you got to be honest with yourself. Just like rip it open, put the heart out on the table. What did I do? No bullshit. What did I do to contribute to this situation? Then you got to start looking at your limiting beliefs that contributed. What things do I believe that are irrational, that are untrue, but they still keep driving my actions? And I'll tell you what I mean here. I talk about this a lot, the power of consistency. It's what I call kind of the circle of life. You know, we have a thought, any thought, your brain has a thought. It has a little electrical impulse that goes to another part of your brain called the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus gets that little bolt of electricity and it secretes a chemical that triggers your emotion. So if I have a fearful thought, my hypothalamus automatically, I don't get any choice about it, happens automatically unless if I have neurological problems, then that's different. But if I'm a normal person, I have a frightened thought, my brain starts producing adrenaline and epinephrine. And I have a frightened emotion. So the emotion is a reflection of the thought. Then I take an action, I do something, and then I create a result, and the cycle continues. Here's the problem. Our emotions and our actions are always based on our thoughts, even if the thought is wrong or inaccurate. So you have to make sure your thoughts are accurate, because you can believe some bullshit in your life that's untrue, like salespeople or crooks, for example. That can drive an emotional reaction that affects you on every sales opportunity, that affects what you do on the sales opportunity, which of course produces what you get. Let me give you an example. Imagine it's late at night. You walk out of the theater. It's you and your kids, your spouse. Guy comes running at you from across the parking lot like a crazy man. He's covered in blood. He's got a knife in one hand. He's coming charging at you, right? Your immediate thought is what? Danger, 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 right? This is a threat to me and my family. Within a nanosecond, your brain is producing epinephrine and adrenaline. You get that fight or flight response, right? You get a defensive posture and you got to run or you got to fight. Well, you can't run because you got kids with you. You can't outrun the guy. So you got to fight. So you step into him, you put yourself in front of your family, you step into him, he comes at you and you hit him in the jaw, you drop him like a sack of potatoes. Dude is eaten out of a straw for 6 months, right? Bam, that's your action. What's the result? You protected your family, right? That's how it's supposed to work. You had the thought, triggered emotion, triggered action, triggered result. But then the police get there and the guy regains consciousness. He can't really speak very well because he broke his jaw. But you find out that he was no threat to you whatsoever. You misinterpreted the situation. You were wrong. Your thought was wrong. Turns out it was a kid running across the parking lot. The blood was fake. The knife was fake. He was running to meet some kids and go to a Halloween party, right? So your thought was completely wrong or inaccurate. Yet how real was the emotion? How real was the action? How real was the broken jaw? How real was the fact that you assaulted a teenage kid, the result? So the reality is you can believe things that are false and trigger very real emotions, actions, and results. There was a very famous case 10 years ago. 2 high school girls leave school together, get in a car crash. So horrific was the accident, they could not tell which girl was which. They were of similar body type and hair, and they couldn't tell which girl was which. To make it worse, one of the girls died. They finally get the mess sorted out. One girl goes to the hospital, other girl goes to the morgue. They have a funeral. 5 weeks after the funeral, the girl in the hospital regains consciousness. And when she begins to speak, her family realizes this is not our daughter. They had made a tragic mistake, right? Now, here's the question. During those 5 weeks, were the families, their emotions and their actions, were they based on what was true or what they thought was true? What they thought was true, right? That's how powerful a thought is, even if it's wrong. So we have to look at our thoughts, because you can have irrational thoughts that are driving very real emotions, very real action, and very, very real result. It's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's psychology 101. It's why our mothers always said, be careful what you wish for, right? It's not rocket science. So to Jim, look for the role that you played in your current situation. Examine the limiting beliefs that could be perpetuating your thought. Remember, Einstein said you cannot fix a financial problem at the same level of thinking that created your financial problem, which means you got to start thinking differently, which means you got to figure out what bullshit limiting beliefs, what I call junk in the trunk, are fueling your decisions about money, right? To figure that out, you got to look back at, what did you learn from your dad? What did you learn from your grandfather? What did you learn from the adults around you? I learned rich people were crooks. You couldn't trust sales guys, right? That rich people stole their money. That's what I learned from my dad. It's no surprise when I was 20 years old, I didn't see the problem with stealing money to get money because, hey, rich people are crooks, right? I was fulfilling my prophecy. That was it. So figure out the limiting beliefs, and then what I just went over, Jim, write out what you want now. Write out what you want now, and what one or two things have you got to do every single day to change your current situation. But you have to accept responsibility for it. If you're in that current situation because it's somebody else's fault, then you have no chance of fixing it. You'll have to wait till they fix it for you. I mean, think about it. If somebody else created the bullshit in your life, then that means they got to come back and fix the bullshit in your life. What's the likelihood of that happening? You know? But if I created the bullshit in my life, then I can fix it. I just got to take ownership of that, figure out the limiting beliefs that contribute to that, and then go through that fear process in terms of what I want moving ahead. I hope that helps, Jim. But I mean, that's 25-cent psychology there in a very short amount of time. But, you know, that's what I would do.
I don't want to take too much more of your time. We've been on for 30 minutes. I got 8 other people here. Do you guys have any questions for him, for Wally?
Hey, Wally, I have a question. My name is Matt Sink, and appreciate you coming on, man, and spending time with us. I'm actually business partners with Dan. We do water treatment together. And I know the times are a little bit different from when you were beating down doors in the HVAC business, but we do a lot of door knocking. We do Facebook ads. We do a number of different things to try and generate leads. But was there anything, because I guess there are some parallels with what we do and what you did with in-home sales and stuff. Was there anything out of the box that you did to generate leads yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there were a couple of things. I was a huge fan, and still am, of direct mail. And I know direct mail kind of fell out of favor with the onset of email, but there are a lot of studies out there and articles now that are extolling the virtues of getting back to direct mail, because now we're experiencing in email the same phenomenon we had with junk mail 10 or 15 years ago, which was just inundation, right, with direct response mail. The key with direct response mail is to have a very compelling offer. You have to have people open that up. I'll give you an example. I was in the heating and air conditioning industry, and you'll find the parallel here. But back through a couple of years of my early years in the HVAC industry, there were credits, tax credits, up to $1,500 that homeowners could get for buying a high efficiency heating and air conditioning system, right? So what we would do is every January, we go January through April 15th, we would send out a manila envelope, kind of a yellow looking envelope that looked very official with a direct sales letter in it. But the teaser on the outside would say, and it was designed to look very formal, it would say important tax information enclosed. Now, if you get a brown envelope somewhere between January and April that says important tax information enclosed, what do you have to do? You got to open it, right? And then I would disclose that important tax information, which was the rebates on the systems. Then here's what's interesting. Here's why I talk about when they zig, you got to zag. A couple of years later, the rebates expired. And everybody was, we can't do leads anymore. We lost all the rebate business and people aren't getting tax credits and blah, blah, blah. So guess what? I continued for years to do my tax letter. And I would say important tax information enclosed. Only now the letter enclosed would say this do nothing Congress did not reinstate the tax credits. So fortunately for you, your local HVAC contractor is going to fill that gap, and I'm going to offer such and such discounts to compensate for those tax credits. So it's just about being creative and getting people to open up your marketing message. Canvassing can be really effective too. It sounds like what you guys are doing that. If you can effectively recruit a team, they're difficult to manage because they're typically kids doing after school, teenagers. But if you can get them to knock on doors and offer some free service, some free water testing thing, we're in your neighborhood today just testing for water purity or whatever. I'm sure you guys have some device to kind of, put a valuation on the health of their water, more or less, and offer that test, and then get in and set leads from there. Those would be very effective ways. I think, the traditional stuff, the SEO, the SEM stuff, obviously people are really interested in the purity of their water. We've heard so many horrible stories. The big one, I think, up in Detroit or wherever it was up there, that kids were dying practically, if not literally, from the bad water. So people are aware of that. Those are some of the ideas that I would have if we were just kicking ideas around.
Thanks, man.
Awesome, Wally. Well, I appreciate your time, man. Any last second nuggets you want to drop before we get off?
The only other thing I would say is, success in sales, success in life is a 3-part process. The first step is getting the proper mindset, right? The prosperity mindset. That's what the power of consistency is all about. Step 2 is having a process. You got to have a sales process, right? A repetitive, duplicatable process. Consistent process delivers consistent results. The third component is consistency itself, doing those things every single day. I don't care what you're working on. If you have the right mindset, the right process, and you execute every single day, then you're going to have success. The key is doing the quiet time ritual every day. That will drive the behaviors. I don't have time to get into it now, but neurologically, if you read that every day, it drives you to engage in those behaviors. Read The Power of Consistency. And I talk a lot in there about how the actions then become a reflection of the quiet time ritual, and it forces those actions to become second nature. And that's a powerful process.
Awesome, man.
Cool.
Well, I really appreciate you.
All right, guys.
Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. You guys have enjoy the rest of your meetings down there.
All right, you
Thanks,
too,
buddy.
man.
Bye, guys.